It imagines a world where what if the expert of this particular facet of the story could sit in and actually give a robust defense or examination or attack about it. Everyone, and welcome back to No Script, an unscripted conversation about theater's best scripts. I'm Jackson, that's Jacob, and here we are. We're back again. We're back into the swing of things. No longer are we at the start of the season. We're kind of rolling along, getting to more scripts, and excited to talk about another great one today.
And I mean, today we're talking about like one of the big G great playwrights of America right now. It's a privilege. Anytime... there are very few playwrights. I like a lot of playwrights, right? Like a lot of playwrights. I love a lot of playwrights. Still, that's a big group. And then there's the select few playwrights for whom every time you pick up the script, you're like, this is going to be so good.
Yeah.
Every time. No matter how many times you've read it or if it's a new script, you pick it up in your hands or your Kindle or your whatever, and you're like, this is just going to be so good. I just know it. And Stephen Adly Guirgis is in that group of like, I just know that it's going to be awesome. And today's script, no exception. It's totally different than other Stephen Adly Guirgis stuff. It shares a lot in common with other Stephen Adly Guirgis stuff. I find this script very moving. I find its worldview powerful. It's the way that it deals with a very well-known story to be just delightful. I'm so excited about it. I love Stephen Adly Guirgis, and I love this play.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, today we're talking about the last days of Judas Iscariot. So excited to have the chance to talk about it. I imagine your list of playwrights that you love is there's an even smaller list of titles that you love, Jacob.
That is true.
and multiple of Stephen Adly Guirgis's plays are on that list. I know
he is the master titler. I mean, I'm sure I've done this rant before, but go through Stephen Adly Guirgis's titles. They're all so good.
Real good.
They're so good.
Yep.
Jesus hopped the A train between Riverside and Crazy, The Mother Ever with the Hat, The Last Days of Judas Iscariot. I mean, they're so good.
Yeah,
those
like
titles
gripping.
are evocative and moving and memorable and just great.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes you want to pick it up and read it. And it was really fun to read it. Excited to have the conversation today. It is a great play. It's a play that, it's almost like a mythic play or a sort of like, I don't know, like a contemporary fable or something, because it's dealing with characters that, as Jacob said, we know so well, or at least have had the chance to be known very well, because they're characters that have been in kind of the popular awareness for 2,000 years or so, and so it's interesting to interact with them in a new and fresh way, but also the compelling story that he's telling and bringing them all together for under the construct of the court hearing. I'm excited to have the conversation about it.
I mean, this play is Stephen Adly Guirgis wrestling with some, if you're a person of faith, some of the big questions about the nature of faith. Not just Christian faith, although this play, Judas Iscariot is the title character, right? Has a distinctly Christian slant. Stephen Adly Guirgis, of course, raised Catholic, is now sort of an agnostic, spiritual person who still has this like deeply Catholic upbringing. And so it does have that vein, but Stephen Adly Guirgis now, with his faith being perhaps broader than just Christianity, these are also questions about like the nature of existence, of goodness. Like if you think of religion or spirituality as like a way to understand good and evil in the world, like what does that mean? How do we define those things? What are the questions about us and ourselves? How do people that have done bad things, how do they lose access to goodness in the world? I mean, really deep questions in I mean, if you're familiar with Stephen Adly Guirgis at all, within the world of characters who swear profusely, who
Right.
talk about their sex lives openly and with language that I don't generally use in my everyday life to describe, and so it is this like, this play is like strange in an amazing way.
It is, yeah. It is this kind of like critique, or not critique, an examination of morality, and the what divides someone who is deemed outside of that morality from the people who are deemed inside of that morality. And I think the play does a great job at kind of like saying why, like what is the difference between some of these people. So anyway, excited to have the conversation about it. It's going to be a great conversation around these characters all getting thrown together and kind of jumbled through the action of the play.
Quick teaser just to get you to the other side of the Patreon post. Saint Mother Teresa is a character, and Satan. Both characters appearing as speaking dialogic characters within the play. If that doesn't excite you, nothing will.
Nothing.
Before we get there, we just want to invite you to head on over to our Patreon page, patreon.com/noscriptpodcast. All one word, no hyphens, no underscores. Patreon.com/noscriptpodcast. That's where you can become a supporter of the show. We've got awesome supporters, a big group of genuinely delightful humans who have made supporting the show something that matters enough to them to give us money. And that money makes doing the show possible. We could not do this show for free. It's just not free to produce. It's not free in the time commitment, and also just literally the money cost of running a podcast in this way. Couldn't do it without the support of our folks on Patreon. Big thank you to you if that's you. If it's not, check it out. There's, of course, tiers and different rewards, and you can check all that out over there. But the big, I think, benefit is knowing that No Script Podcast exists because of people like you. Thank you if that's you. If that's not you yet, please check it out. $1 a month is the lowest tier. Even that is hugely helpful. $1 a month, $12 over the course of the year. We would be so grateful, and we are grateful to those of you who support us. Check us out, patreon.com/noscriptpodcast, and we'll see you over there.
Thank you, patrons. Y'all rock. Y'all the best. Thanks a bunch.
And now, back to the script.
Here we go. We're going to jump into the conversation here in just a moment, but I'm going to give you a brief summary of this script as we jump into it.
I'm going to give you a brief context of the script.
Yeah.
We're all jumbled right now.
Yeah, all jumbled. That's fine.
We've only been doing it for more than 250 episodes across 13 seasons. And I think we've never had anything but that order. But hey. Today was the day. Stephen Adly Guirgis, we've done on the podcast a number of times. He's got to be up there amongst our most discussed playwrights in that group, just because his plays are all awesome. This play, 2005, had its off-Broadway premiere at the Public Theater. This was part of the production done by Labyrinth Theater Company, which was Stephen Adly Guirgis' theater company, alongside people like Philip Seymour Hoffman, John Ortiz. They did this sort of, I don't know if experimental is right, but it was a place for them to try stuff. They do these sort of retreats where they go away and play with new material, or they were doing that at the time. And as Stephen Adly Guirgis tells the story, and this is just from the foreword of my copy of the script, he describes that he was sort of on a call where they were talking about what material are you going to bring to our workshop this fall, to our time to go away and play with new material. And he was kind of like, I don't really know. And they were like, we're going to need better than that. And so he said, as he describes it, he says, I'm just quoting here, and then I honestly have no idea why I said, put me down as the last days of Judas Iscariot. Now, as we said in the prior to Patreon intro part of the podcast, Stephen Adly Guirgis was raised Catholic, and so this play is full of saints and other kind of Catholic imagery. But this question of like guilt, of purgatory, of hell, of things like that are a big part of all of Christendom. But the Catholic Church, perhaps especially, questions about the nature of sin and forgiveness and confession and things like that, and the eternal where did Judas Iscariot, who was, one of the 12 disciples, end up? Is he in hell currently for eternal damnation? All that. So he had been thinking about this. This question had been in him for a while, and he goes on to write this play as part of that Labyrinth production. So 2005, gets that off-Broadway premiere at the Public Theater, gets really, really great reviews, goes on to the Almeida Theater in London, and then a couple of different productions over the next, 20 years or so. A lot of them at colleges. Jackson and I were talking before we started recording, and partially just due to like the cast size required to do this play, colleges are one of the places where you might be more likely to see this play than at a regional professional house. Colleges are, and community theaters to some degree, are kind of the last places doing really, really big cast straight plays. And so the bigger the cast, the more likely that you'll see it at a college as opposed to other places. So 2016, Sound Theater Company in Seattle, Skidmore College in New York. 2017 is part of, I think their 70th anniversary, but don't quote me on that number. La Mama Theater in New York, which is a really, really important theater company in the history of American theater and New York City theater especially. La Mama did it. 2019, a production I believe at First Church in Boston. A church produced this play, a Unitarian Universalist church, which will make more sense as we talk more about the play. 2021, Purchase College in New York. 23 at USC. Just this last spring, 2024, at Ithaca College. And then as I was reading through the description of this sort of way of doing the play, something called the Jesuit Media Lab in spring of 2024 did this 3-night Lectio Divina sort of reflection on this play, which is repetition and prayer and meditation around the play. So they met for 3 nights across the 3 acts of the play, and they would read them, and they'd do different kinds of reflections, and then they'd read another section from that section. They'd read it over again. Very, very interesting, and a way of using this play, which is religious in nature, I suppose, but also like, maybe it would be offensive to a lot of the religious folks that I know for sure, using it as part of a devotion and a religious worshipful reflection experience. Very, very interesting, and certainly speaks to the sort of confusion, the weirdness, the awesome weirdness, let me be clear, but the weirdness around what this play is and who it's for.
Yeah. For sure. There's definitely like resonances for communities of faith, but definitely edginess for them as well. It has a real resonance for anyone who's gone through a deconstruction period, who maybe grew up in religious circles, but has since, moved away from it and has some pretty serious questions. So yeah, it's a great discussion piece for those purposes, definitely. So excited to have our own discussion about it today within the theatrical sphere. And now the prophesied summary is going to occur. I'm going to jump into just a brief summary of this play. This is a kind of a court drama. It takes place in a neighborhood of purgatory called Hope, and the trial that is happening. I believe it's Gloria, a character who kind of comes on and says a little bit of context for where we're at. Talks about how Hope used to be this place of contemplation, where souls could go between heaven and hell and contemplate what they did in life and eventually get to one place or the other. Now, as the current mood of the day is more litigation, it has become a courtroom area. So, But in this courtroom area, a defense lawyer, has brought a case before the court. The defense lawyer, Fabiana Aziza Cunningham, has brought the case of Judas Iscariot to the court. The Judge Littlefield, is immediately reticent to take the case at all. He kind of throws it out over and over again. He throws every case, it seems like, that comes across his desk out almost immediately, kind of flippantly. But eventually, through some of the pushing of Cunningham, and also the emergence of Yusuf El al-Fayumi, who is willing to prosecute the case, and also a number of writs that are brought in, one from St. Peter, one from God, by way of St. Monica, kind of praying to God that eventually this court hear the case of Judas Iscariot. The judge allows the court to be heard. And over the course of the play, we get a number of asides from a number of characters. The play starts with Henrietta Iscariot, who is Judas Iscariot's mother, kind of talking through some of her relationship with Judas initially, and setting the course of the play. We get some asides from St. Monica. We get some asides from St. Thomas, some asides from St. Matthew. All these characters kind of come through and give us more and more kind of context for Judas in their experience of Judas and the relationship with him in life. But we also, by virtue of the court proceedings, get a whole bunch of witnesses. We get St. Teresa. We get, Mother Teresa. We get Caiaphas the Elder. We get Simon the Zealot, Sigmund Freud, Pontius Pilate. We get Henrietta Iscariot as well. And of course, the culminative witness, Satan, the Lord of the Hells, shows up to give witness. Who just goes by
Lou. I mean, that's funny to me. Yep. They don't call him Satan. They just call him Lou.
Yep.
To all the Lou's out there, that's a tough one for you.
That's
I'm
a tough
sorry
one.
about that.
Yep. He and the judge have a bit of a prior relationship, it sounds like, and so there's some familiarity there. But through the course of all of these interactions, and we'll highlight a couple of them in our conversation today. I don't know if we'll get to all of them. As I read the list, there's like, 6 or 7 witnesses.
Will not.
Yeah. But through the course of it, a lot of great questions are asked about the nature of why Judas should be in one place or another. Notably, Judas is never brought to the stand. We get 2 moments of the actual character of Judas in real time. There's other moments of him in the past as well. But the current Judas is kind of catatonic in hell and silent. We have some people interact with, we have 2 people interact with him. The most notable one at the very end, Jesus himself goes and speaks to Judas at the very end of the play. More on that in just a second. But for the most part, Judas is not in the courtroom. Everyone else is just talking about him and recounting stories from the past. And we get a number of different perspectives. We get Sigmund Freud's philosophical or psychological perspective. We get Pontius Pilate's kind of read on the situation. But kind of notably throughout the course of the play, we get a lot of Cunningham and Yusuf al-Fayumi's 2 sides of the coin sorts of arguments against why Judas should be where he is, which Satan ends up using at the end. Slowly through the course of the investigation, there's kind of a switcheroo that happens where it's no longer just Judas being kind of dug into and the reasons for why Judas is in the place that he's at, but in fact a lot to do with Cunningham and where she's at, a lot to do with Fayumi and where he's at, and so there's this kind of like flip of the coin that happens where a lot of people are kind of also brought into the light and asking the question of why are we here and Judas is there? Why are some of you in heaven and some of us in purgatory and some of us in hell? What's the nature of this whole thing? Which culminates in this really kind of beautiful, touching scene. There's all sorts of moralism discussed. There's free will discussed. There's lack of free will discussed. And then there's this touching scene.
To give you, because I think the touching scene will be more powerful. Just this example. One of the times where that I think becomes this question of like who's good and who's evil, and how do you know? Right? How does God, or the judge, in this case, literally a judge, that's how he imagines the stage, decides who's good enough to go to heaven or evil enough to go to hell, right? Like, and how does forgiveness play into all that? One of the places where that's examined is when Mother Teresa is on the stand. And the prosecutor, who is speaking against Judas, right, and sort of for the more moralistic view of the universe, of course, has Mother Teresa describe all the amazing things. And I believe the prosecutor is Egyptian. And so there's a huge sort of backstory of him specifically in memory of Mother Teresa, right? And then the defense attorney who's speaking on behalf of Judas and for this more like that moralistic view of the universe is more unjust is maybe her sort of core philosophy. She starts to dig into Mother Teresa about some of the things that are questionable about Mother Teresa's life, about who she was willing to accept money from, about whether or not she was willing to speak out against anti-Semitism in Germany, about her particularly hardline stance on abortion. So some of the things that muddy the waters about Mother Teresa's legacy. And of course, the larger point that comes out of that is this idea that like even like on the list of like the top 5 greatest humans to ever live, Mother Teresa's like
right
on that. I mean, in contention for one of those spots, right? But even if you put her on the witness stand, even she has these sort of muddy, questionable, like, why is this person good and that person evil? How do you weigh those things, right? So that's some of the kinds of things that happen in this courtroom across the course of the play to set us up for
this kind of final scene. In addition to add another beat into this final scene, Mother Teresa is the character who sets up this notion of despair as the thing that hell is. So to be completely consumed by despair is this like complete degree away where you are so consumed by despair that you can't even take the offered gift of salvation or of eternal life or whatever. Very, very free will stance on that. But that's culminated in the last scene of the play. You have finally a conversation with Jesus of Nazareth and Judas Iscariot. He finally gets Judas to wake up. They have this conversation, and we just see the degree to which Judas has been consumed by his despair. How no matter how many efforts that Jesus of Nazareth like tries to make towards Judas, stating of love, stating of forgiveness, stating of I want us to find a way to be friends again, Judas just can't receive it, whether through anger or whether through despair, whether through sadness. There's no route, to the point that it almost like somewhat absurdly he'll flip a comment completely the other way that is given to him. A comment of love becomes a comment of hate toward in his reception of it. And eventually he recedes back into this kind of catatonic state. And then we're kind of hit with this scene as the final scene out of nowhere at the end of the play.
I do want to just make one more thought about the Jesus Judas scene. I don't know how much time we'll have to talk about each of these things. One of the really heartbreaking things that happens in that scene is this question of God abandoning people who God deems evil enough to go to hell is like one of the core moral debates that's at the center of this courtroom scene, right? And so in this Jesus Judas scene, which seems pretty much separate from the courtroom drama. I mean, it's about to get involved in it, but there's not a lot that it references back to that. One of the things that happens is that Jesus says, Judas, actually, I've always been with you. I've never abandoned you, despite the fact that Judas accuses Jesus of abandoning him a number of times. And then towards the end of that scene, as Judas starts to sort of recede back into this catatonic state, this state that Mother Teresa called despair earlier in the play, he starts to say, "Where are you going? Why are you leaving me?" over and over to Jesus, who we, the audience, can see is not going anywhere. And so there becomes this like sense in which we sort of understand the perspective of the play that Judas like believes he's been abandoned, when in fact we, the audience, can see that that is not actually true. And that becomes, I found that like a really moving like picture, moving maybe not in an uplifting way, but in a very saddening way, to like watch Judas experience abandonment. Where are you going? Don't leave me. Don't leave me alone. Even while the Jesus character does not go anywhere, stays there to the very, very, very final image of the play, which I'm sure you'll get to.
Yeah. This scene kind of persists. Eventually, Judas kind of recedes into catatonia, and then this like tertiary, maybe quadrutiary character shows up.
It's amazing.
Butch Honeywell, who's been a juror. He's had a brief scene before. He's probably been on stage throughout, but he's been depending on your staging of it. But he's been a juror. He was introduced earlier as not really knowing that he's dead, and kind of like shying away from the fact. And he comes
Satan earlier tells Butch, when Satan's on the stand.
Yeah.
I'd marked down every place Butch appeared. He says like, "You're on my list, buddy."
Yeah.
Which is like,
but he shows up with like this with 5 beers left of a 12 pack and here to like tell Judas, hey man, sorry, we voted against you. But that proceeds to like have him have this revelatory moment of, I think maybe I'm dead, and kind of this confession that he says to Judas next to Jesus, and this like this confession of his like affair.
I can't tell. I mean, I don't know if you can, whether he sees Jesus.
Yeah, I think that's a great that would be such a fun decision to get to make. Because I think it's there for some degree of interpretation. He certainly starts the scene talking to Judas, and it would be interesting to see if there's ever a moment where he realizes that Jesus is also there. Just so really impactful scene at the very end of the play with this character who we've like sort of had a relationship, but just brings this sucker punch at the end of the play as he recounts kind of how he's realized that he's probably dead, what he wishes that he could be doing, and how much he misses like his wife and the life that they had before the affair that he kind of fell into. And so that's the kind of like final moments with these characters.
So if I may, let me read this last section, because it makes the play. This interaction with this, as you say, tertiary character. One of the jurors gets a couple of passing mentions early, comes in at the end after they've declared Judas guilty, and tells this story about how he had an affair early in his marriage and how that just ruined his life. And he never told his wife, and then he ended up going on to have many other affairs to try to escape the guilt of this. And I kept it a secret until he's now dead. And this like terrible, awful weight, guilt he's been carrying. And whether or not he sees Jesus, that's maybe related to the theme of the play. But regardless, this is how the play ends, with him saying to Judas, "Do you know who W.H. Auden was, Mr. Iscariot? W.H. Auden was a poet who once said, 'God may reduce you on Judgment Day to tears of shame, reciting by heart the poems you would have written had your life been good. She,' his wife, 'was my poem, Mr. Iscariot, her and the kids, but mostly her. You cashed in silver, Mr. Iscariot, but me, I threw away gold. That's a fact. That's a natural fact.'" Those are the last spoken lines of the play. And then
the last action of the play is Jesus sighing, taking off his shirt, and going through, washing the feet of the now catatonic Judas, mixed with tears, and such an impactful scene.
He's washing Judas' feet. This is the last image of the play. I don't know what to make of this play that is deeply religious at its core. I mean, it asks questions that like you can only really ask if you're a person of faith. Otherwise, they just like they're not questions that make sense to ask within the context of your worldview. And the culmination is this like deeply Christian, I mean, Jesus washing the feet of his disciples as a metaphor for washing the feet of sinners, and Jesus' like servanthood and sacrifice is like almost the most Christian image you can imagine, perhaps except for Jesus on the cross.
Yeah, this play is filled with those sort of resonant images of faith, juxtaposed with unexpected characterizations of these characters of faith. And so it's really interesting because I think that juxtaposition is a extension of welcome and hospitality into the story. Kind of this, there's a lot of exposition that happens to kind of like give you a little bit of an in if you're not a person of faith or something like that through these characters. But it does pack a wallop for people who have been steeped in these characters and in this imagery already, by virtue of kind of dealing in moments like the foot washing at the end. That is such a resonant image for someone who has kind of been in the Christian water for a while. All of these characters too. The emergence of Caiaphas the Elder is another one of like, oh my gosh,
there's a great joke. I forget which of the lawyers. I think it was probably Yusuf, but I can't quite remember. When Caiaphas the Elder first takes the stand, he's like, "So you are Caiaphas the Elder, right?" "Yes, I am." "And is there a Caiaphas the Younger?" "No, there is not. But you are Caiaphas the Elder." "Yes." And then that lawyer says like, "I just won $10."
Yeah. Yeah, there's all sorts of that, like, delightful, irreverent, especially from the prosecutor, sort of stuff that, like, shows up, and all these characters. Like, it is interesting that, like, the degree to which the juxtapose of, like, language plays a part in in each of these characters as they show up. You kind of, like, expect something of them, like Mother Teresa, for instance. Whatever your expectations of Mother Teresa is, she probably defies some of them.
She spends the first, like, it might be 3 to 5 full minutes of stage time of her time on the witness stand. They just go back and forth because she can't hear them.
Yeah.
She's, like, so old that, like, she cannot hear the questions, and she just, like, answers the wrong questions, and they have to, like, scramble around to find, like, hearing aids for her. And then when she does have the hearing aids, she gives them a bunch of lip about how they were thinking she couldn't hear. I mean, it's like a totally, a totally different image than the Mother Teresa you expect. Gloria, the angel who is, like, our interlocutor for the first half of the play, is, like, smoking all the time.
Yep.
I mean, of course, the characters swear, the characters are, asking really irreverent is maybe even too polite a word for the way in which they're interacting with, like, this, like, holy Christian story of Jesus' time on earth. But I don't know, for me, that irreverence, like, it's handled. I guess maybe this is what I'm saying, is that Stephen Adly Guirgis handles, like, the religion, the spirituality of it, it is weirdly reverent towards the Jesus story. As long as you're willing to see through the swearing and the sex jokes and all of that kind of stuff, right? Like, at the core of it is a deeply reverently held, it seems like, worldview for the idea of forgiveness, eternal love. I mean, Jesus as a character is not treated irreverently. I mean, he's washing people's feet, not to make a joke of it, but in, like, a really holy moment.
Yeah, pretty much universally. It's interesting. A lot of people, this is pretty typical of this debate too. A lot of people have big words to say towards God, and the concept of this God who could possibly set someone up to fail as much as Judas has been set up to fail, I think, is part of the argument. But interestingly, it's very rarely directed at Jesus. There is like this kind of, like, core throughout. Even Pontius has this kind of, like, I like the guy, sort of attitude towards Jesus. Like, he was almost like a Roman. And so there is this kind of, like, reverence still kind of directed towards Jesus, and then eventually, like, having him show up in a couple scenes is that's echoed throughout.
I mean, I think it's really smart that he's never brought to the trial. The trial is the place where, like, the most counterintuitive sort of lens for the viewing of the Christ story and all the different investigations of it come about, right? Like, Satan, has all kinds of things to say about the size of his package, right? That's the kind of stuff that happens, like, within the context of the trial. And then around and outside the trial are these, like, really strangely serious portrayals. I mean, as you described, the play opens with a character who Guirgis has named Henrietta, whatever, but the mother of Judas, right? Describing the pain of burying her own son in a beggar's field because he had committed suicide. Like, who's ever thought about that? Like, Judas' family and the pain and suffering they must experience, right? Like, the demise of Judas is often in the context of the bad thing that he did. But this play starts with his grieving family. I mean, what a counterintuitive yet very deeply serious interaction with the gospel story.
Yeah. Yep. Which continues to be the case, right? Multiple characters have this, like, confessional sort of moment, asides that happen outside of the courtroom of talking about their complicated relationship with Judas. And you get the sense over and over that the way Judas's life wound up going through the betrayal and eventually the suicide it has left this hole in a lot of the characters' hearts. And I think that like Peter has that, Matthew has that. I think it's Matthew. I'm gonna forget it. It might be Thomas, but either Matthew or Thomas has this scene where he talks about how like abrasive Judas is throughout, but how like when they're sent out together, the saint who is talking says like, I messed up all day. I think I blinded someone rather than healed them. And it was Judas who over and over kind of saved the situation, fixed things, and then when we came back was really gracious about our time out in the field together. So there is this like kind of complicating of the story as you really examine what it would be like to live in such close community with someone, to live have your son be the one who betrayed the Messiah. All of these things are these complicating factors in the question of Judas.
And then, like, the small parts of the gospel story get treated with these sort of full-blown investigations in a way that I find very, very interesting. Like the question of, why did Pontius Pilate wash his hands of this? There were many crucifixions that happened under Pontius Pilate.
Hundreds.
Yeah, so what does that mean? So Pontius Pilate is put on the witness stand and asked these questions in a driving, antagonistic kind of way. I find the treatment of, and it becomes a big theme that they come back to a number of times during the trial, the very small mention in one gospel of the fact that after it all happened, Judas tried to give the money back. You know what? Why? What does that mean? How does that influence the story? If we, the broader Christendom or people of faithdom believe in like forgiveness, why does the fact that Judas showed remorse and like tried to undo the harm he had done not matter? It's typically read in like a, too late, buddy, wagging finger kind of way. But like, why is that true? We're like, it's supposed to be like a faith of forgiveness, right?
Right. And I think I like that question of forgiveness / grace / what happens afterward. Is there like a finality to what happens afterward? It's like the philosophical debate is interesting, and there's that is treated with such multiple sidedness in this one, which is great. It like brings out the debate fully. I think the interesting thing to me was like, why are we having this conversation today? Like, it's not Judas who brings the case. It's not Judas who is trying to get out. Yeah, right. And as much as it's an interesting philosophical debate for all these people to be here, there's this question of like, why are we talking about it? I think, and I think that's where Cunningham, the defense lawyer, comes into the question, into the equation. The two people who are the kind of inciting incident in my mind for this, the people who could possibly, at least in the exposition we get, be the fire that starts, or the spark that starts this fire, are Cunningham and, interestingly, Peter. Because Cunningham comes to court with a writ from Peter saying we need to examine this case again, and everyone's like, Judas is catatonic, he's not even here, we don't even need to do this, why are we doing this? But it's Cunningham who pushes. It's Cunningham who then prays to Saint Monica, who goes to God and gets a writ from God that makes the judge actually take the case. So Cunningham as the focal point of this play is an interesting character to me.
No, I totally agree, especially because very, very early in the play, right? What does she say? I don't believe in God.
Yeah.
She's in the courtroom of purgatory arguing that Judas Iscariot ought to go to heaven to be with God and doesn't believe in God. That's right. the character that we get. Now, I will say, I don't know how much that comes up, other than she is a character who Stephen Adly Guirgis has specifically crafted to have the freedom to question the story, because she comes at it from outside the story, right? As a person who says, I don't believe in God. So all this story that we're about to get, the story of these gospels, Cunningham is the kind of person who has the freedom to say, oh yeah, Mother Teresa? Oh yeah? Right. You're so great. Yeah? Well, let's talk about this.
Yeah, and over and over there is this kind of like break point for each of the witnesses that she questions, where the prosecutor sets up something, Cunningham manages to kind of bring another side to it. And to be fair, it happens the other way around too. When Cunningham sets up a witness, the prosecutor kind of knocks down the line of thought as well. Interestingly, the courtroom proceedings culminates in a witness who doesn't do that, and it is Satan, and who doesn't have that like breakpoint moment where he gets caught in the questioning of Cunningham. And I think the kind of way that the mirror rotates towards Cunningham in that interaction, the way the questioning is kind of brought back towards Cunningham, I think again adds weight to Cunningham's character in terms of the focal point of her character in the story. We see her kind of like revealing more and more and more about herself as a result of Satan's cross-examination from the witness stand.
Yeah, I mean, it's the final cross-examination of the play is basically Cunningham versus Satan. And Yusef, the prosecutor, as at times he has some genuinely fiery interactions, his role in the play is less interesting. First of all, he's trying to get a date with Cunningham the whole play.
He's pretty misogynistic throughout.
Yeah, it takes away some of his power and interest. Yeah. But also, like, his job is to like reinforce the like story that be. And so I find his cross-examinations typically less interesting. And so Cunningham's are the really driving force of that part of the play to me. And it ends with this cross-examination with Satan, where the question basically comes down to, like, is God's love conditional? That ends up being the debate that she and Satan have. And Satan, in the end, turns it back on her and accuses her of muddying the waters because she had a very, very difficult relationship with her parents, as far as we learn the story. Her mother literally says, terrible things to her about how she wished she could have aborted her as a young baby. And so Satan basically says to Cunningham, your interest in this is more about the fact that you think your own parents' love was conditional. And that is why you are on this crusade against God, is how he ends up turning the power back against her.
Yeah. The kind of reversal of what she was kind of expecting to get him caught in, like trying to build up this, like, surely you, Satan, the one who was thrown out, have some sort of enmity to get to kind of like join me in my crusade here. It's interesting that like Satan's the one that doesn't break, that is the one that like through I don't know, we don't get a whole bunch of cosmology really in this in this play for like the reasons why the people do what they do, but for whatever reason Satan is the one that is more interested in saying it's like what's with you, what's with your enmity, what are you trying to, I don't know, get forgiveness for, establish about God, establish about this whole system. It's like kind of left there as frustratedly Cunningham has to kind of rest her case.
Well, and Satan's the one in the end who ends up defending the idea of God's all-inclusive love and forgiveness. Yeah. Right? Cunningham is the one going after, like, no, that's not true. God's love is conditional. That's why people end up in hell. If you're bad, you go to hell, right? This sort of, if you're a person who is more familiar with the Christian faith, that's not like really the theology, but it is the like simplified version of the theology, right? Bad people go to hell. Wag your finger, wag your finger, wag your finger. And Satan's the one who ends up saying, no, that's not true, actually. People just sort of choose. Anybody can get into heaven. At one point he says, if they told you straight up that there was no lock to the gates of heaven, right, implying you could get in if you wanted to, he says, then you'd have no incentive at all to even try to be halfway decent. And so it's really interesting of Stephen Adly Guirgis to have the like primary antagonist of the Bible story be the one on the witness stand defending the like to whatever degree you out there think this is true, the deep truth of the Christian story of like all-encompassing love and forgiveness.
Yeah. It's even to the point where he's like, Judas could leave tomorrow if he really wanted to. It'd be great. I mean, get the room open for me. So there's like, so there is this kind of like, this defense of the kind of all-consuming love narrative, and within the free will conversation, at least with the acceptance of free will as an option, the like choosing to accept the love is the step. The kind of pivot on which it all turns. And so the revelation that he wasn't kicked out of heaven, he left there, he was bored, is kind of the like continuation of this narrative that is building. And I think then confirmed by that final scene where we see Judas finally wake up, and we finally get the confirmation. We've seen Judas in scenes before. I think it's actually Satan's testimony that we get a pretty prolonged scene with Judas and Satan kind of days before the events that are under questioning. And so in that scene we see a pretty angry, vitriolic Judas in that scene, but it's still subjective from the perspective of Satan in that respect. So that final scene where we finally see the contemporary present Judas in conversation with Jesus kind of matches the vibe of that setup of that question of is there a degree to which the choice has to be made to accept the love?
Yeah, and so the way that the play ends up being structured is this sort of back and forth between trial scenes and then these asides with other characters where the characters more or less just speak to the audience. And they are characters like St. Peter, St. Matthew, Thomas, Mary Magdalene appears as a character, St. Monica appears as a character. And they have a more, I think that the aside roles is where Stephen Adly Guirgis like invents some stuff, provides maybe like alternate views of the gospel narrative or things that aren't included, sort of imagine some scenes, which is interesting. Then in the trials, it tends to be, with the Bible characters at least, negotiations of little parts of the Bible story that get the full treatment of being blown out into a full cross-examination. Even the cross-examination of Sigmund Freud, who is not a Bible character, obviously, hinges around a small line in the Bible narrative, the fact that Judas committed suicide. So like if you were going to spend a whole cross-examination on that, they go back and forth around like the psychology of suicide and like how, given nowadays our like more equitable, maybe let's say empathetic view of the problem of suicide, like how now does that knowledge apply backwards to how we view this part of the Bible story? There's a great investigation of the Last Supper and the fact that Jesus knows that Judas is about to do this thing that in the scope of the story means that Judas is going to hell, right? And like could have said something, not interfered with his free will, not like, exuded his magic God powers and forced Judas to do something differently, but just like talked to him, convinced him to do something differently, much like he does with Peter, where instead of killing people with his sword, he only ends up cutting off an ear and then putting it away, right? Why didn't he do that? That's there. The opportunity is there, and he doesn't. So they're little fragments of the story that get this like. There's something about the aggressiveness of the cross-examination, especially as it is seen in like media and in plays, that really lends itself to blowing these small moments up.
Yeah. It imagines a world where the expert on the thing is actually in the room. Whereas for the most part, when you're engaging in this topic, it's someone who isn't necessarily the expert trying to conglomerate together all these pieces and fragments. And it's no less true for them because all of that is being infed into the moment. But it imagines a world where what if the expert of this this particular facet of the story could sit in and actually give a robust defense or examination or attack about it? What if Freud could show up and actually give us a psychoanalytic approach to the character of Judas? What if Mother Teresa could come and talk about despair and the difference between heaven and hell in that? So it's very fascinating in that respect as well.
And then it concludes, right? And we come back to this ending scene, and this tertiary character comes on and gives a several page long monologue.
Yeah.
One of the jurors, and Butch Honeywell, right? So let's just live inside that name for a second. That is the most generic, like 50s neighbor in a sitcom kind of name.
Yeah.
And I think that's intentional. Stephen Adly Guirgis is really good at naming stuff. Like, remember when I was raving about that at the beginning of the podcast? This name feels intentionally generic to me.
Yeah. It has a every person sort of like bring it home to how easy it is for someone to fall into the same moment. These sort of mythic characters from history who do these things that we tell stories about that have passed into sort of religious mythology. They're making choices that are made by everyday people as well.
Yeah, it's the everydayness, right? Because I think there's something to be said for the fact that this like everyday person is on the jury, right? And just by nature of what a courtroom drama is, in a play, we serve as the jury. This is not always the case in film and television, where you see the audience, the watching audience, sees so much of the behind the scenes stuff. You're typically on the side of one lawyer or the other. That's the protagonist. So you're not often the jury, I don't think, in film and television courtroom dramas. There's a bigger narrative. But in stage dramas, you typically, the audience, functions as the jury in some way. Both sides make your arguments and you watch, interpret, and make decisions. So we, the audience, are on the jury. And then this person who is like the most everyman of everymans, Butch Honeywell, says, I was on the jury and we found you guilty. We found Judas guilty. And then what he describes is like the most everyday of sins. And like, I don't mean to imply that like having an affair in your marriage is like a small thing or is not like, obviously there are whole plays where that's like the major evil is like having an affair. So I don't mean to like minimize the sin itself or the wrong itself or the whatever. I just mean to imply that Butch comes forward with like an everyday thing. He's not Judas Iscariot. He didn't betray the Son of God. I mean, other people that this court sees are Benedict Arnold, Attila the Hun. There are several serial killers mentioned, right? Mythic evil people. Hitler is not mentioned as one of the people you've seen, I think, because there's a lot of baggage with that. But I think that would be the kind of person we're talking about. Mythic evil people. And this juror steps forward and said, yeah, we found you guilty. And I think the juror, may have done something worse than you. And right. I think there is, I just find that such a remarkable, subtle ending to sort of turn back to us and say, like, what? Everybody does things that hurt people. So, like, How in the world do you gauge or weigh these things on trial? I mean, if this is the trial for Judas Iscariot, this like mythic villain, but I, Butch Honeywell, could easily be on trial for this. And could I really like come up with enough good stuff in my life? And like, how do you weigh those things?
Yeah, what's the scale? How does it all work out? It's not lost on us that this conversation is like, if he's talking to Judas, Butch is in hell too. So
and, drunk. And drunk, right? He walks in like more than halfway through like a 12-pack. And the response, and I think it's such a fascinating question. I know we already talked about it a little bit, but whether or not he can see Jesus, right? Because the implication is that Judas can't see Jesus, even though Jesus is actually there. And so like, is Butch coming from the same place? But that like washing his feet response to that monologue, like, I don't know how like deeply moving this like that ending reads to people who are not like people of faith, and really especially the Christian faith. But like that response to like the idea of like how's my life gonna be weighed for like the good and the evil, and I just find that like a really moving, deeply serious take on the gospel and forgiveness.
Yeah, for sure. There's just so many of those sorts of moments, I feel like, in this play. So many moments where it comes home, where there's like little pieces of like, oof, I wonder like how either how close am I to Butch's story, how close am I to Gloria's story, how close am I to Cunningham's story, how close am I to any of these characters. There's so many different facets, so many different, like, I would have loved to like zoom into the zealot conversation too, because there's like that part of it too. Alas,
I think Simon the Zealot is on the stand, right? And somebody's like, do you think Judas was a zealot? And he says some great line like, well, he didn't exactly attend the meetings, but
yep.
I mean, just by virtue of like the kind of life where I am, I watch a fair amount of like quote unquote Christian or religious art. I find this play more deeply religious and spiritually interesting than the vast majority of things that are produced under the label of Christian art. And I think it is by its willingness to ask real questions instead of fake ones. And I mean this with all the offense and like deeply, I'm very unsatisfied with the kind of art making you're doing, to like the sort of Christian media landscape. Like seriously, I don't find that most of those questions that those pieces of art making ask are actually real questions about the world, or have any interest in like actually investigating real answers about the world. And it's something about this is like counterculturalness. Like theater's always been countercultural. It gets shut down in times of oppression right quick because it's this, like, part of its role is to be like slightly uncomfortable.
Right.
And like, like the one of the more famous musicals about the Holocaust is Cabaret, which is like full of slightly uncomfortableness, That's kind of theater's job. And this play really fills that role of being at once like very serious about the gospel and it is kind of uncomfortable in a way that is so awesome. I mean, just so awesome.
Yeah. Stephen Adly Guirgis has a quote at the beginning in the kind of introduction of this play that is right along those lines, where he says, "I won't pretend at all that this play answers that question, the question of what it means to truly be ourselves, and the difficulty of the heaven, hell, etc." So he says, "I won't pretend at all that this play answers that question, but if it provokes the question in you, then please let it. Ponder it." And so that act of theater that kind of unsettles, disorients, shakes things up, and allows you the chance to ask questions and seek answers, engage in trying to find them, but very importantly to exist in the space of questions, is unparalleled. It's what theater is supposed to do. It's why people get uncomfortable with it, but it's why it's so good. So if there is a moment where you have the chance to engage this play, or engage theater in general, but specifically for today, this play, we would love to continue the conversation with you. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, or X at the username @NoScriptPodcast. We also have a Gmail, noscriptpodcast@gmail.com. Find us on any of those sites. We'd love to keep talking about the last days of Judas Iscariot with you.
If you enjoyed this conversation, any of our other conversations, please recommend us to your family, your friend, anybody you know that likes theater, that likes conversations about stories, writing, in this case, about like weirdly Christian counterculture. Send them our way. They can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, YouTube, Podbean, all the places where you find your podcasts. You can also like our Facebook page, and a link to the new episode appears every Monday. Very easy to click and play from there as long as you have a Facebook page. Until next week, when we'll be back with another great conversation about another great script. I'm Jacob. That's Jackson. Thanks for joining us for No Script the Podcast.